Hi, I'm Helen Bauer, and this is the Heart of Hospice podcast. The Heart of Hospice podcast is your source for compassionate and informative discussions about hospice and end-of-life care. I'm a certified hospice and palliative care nurse with over 15 years of experience. Whether you're a caregiver, someone with a serious illness, or you simply need to know more about hospice care, this podcast is for you. Join me as we explore all the aspects of hospice, from the details of caregiving to the emotional and spiritual dimensions of end-of-life journeys. For more resources and to connect with me, visit theheartofhospice.com and find us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Keep listening for today's episode.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time. Content presented in the following podcast is for information purposes only. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of the host and guest and may not represent the views and opinions of the Whole Care Network. Always consult with your physician for any medical advice, and always consult with your attorney for any legal advice. And thank you for listening to the Whole Care Network.
This episode is being sponsored by bkbooks.com. BK Books helps care teams and families understand what to expect at the end of life. Created by Barbara Carnes, these trusted booklets and videos explain the physical and emotional changes of dying with warmth and clarity. Whether you're guiding others or caring for someone you love, BK Books brings understanding that eases fear and fosters peace. Explore our compassionate resources at bkbooks.com.
Ken Ross, founder of the Elisabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation, is talking with me about the work of his mother and the legacy he's carrying forward around the world. Ken Ross, son of Dr. Elisabeth Kubler-Ross, is my guest today. He's the founder and current president of the EKR Foundation. From his childhood through adulthood, Ken accompanied his mom on extensive international travel, observed her lectures and her workshops on death, dying, and the human experience, all of which was an influence that continues to inform his work today. As president of the EKR Foundation, Ken oversees global public relations and curates Dr. Kubler-Ross's personal archives. Ken also serves on the board of directors for Open to Hope and sits on the advisory council of the Humane Prison Hospice Project. For the last 9 years of Dr. Kubler-Ross's life, Ken was his mom's primary caregiver, supporting her until her death in 2004. In our interview, Ken shares how his mom was very much a rule breaker about things in her life and how it influenced her work and her writing. He describes her as being naughty, and you'll hear why. As a very young person, she realized that she wanted to work with marginalized people, and Ken shares several examples of how she did that. Ken also tells several stories of how his mom was very radical, ahead of her time in her work, and all the amazing things that she achieved. He also explains how the 5 stages of grief are not linear. Everybody hear that. These stages of grief were not designed to be linear, and how Dr. Kubler-Ross wrote about it in her book, On Death and Dying. Ken is continuing his mom's work through the EKR Foundation. He still travels throughout the world, starting new hospices, teaching, educating, and connecting all over the globe in the promotion of hospice and palliative care. You can find all of the work of the EKR Foundation and Ken Ross at ekrfoundation.org. You're going to absolutely love this interview. There are a lot of inside stories about Elisabeth Kubler-Ross. She was very much a unique lady, and I think you're going to love this interview. So enjoy. There's a lot to learn. and welcome to the Heart of Hospice podcast. It's an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here. I just had surgery last week, and this is the first thing I've done to go back into life and participating, so I'm very excited to be with you today.
Well, we have wanted to have you on the show for a long time. You're one of these dream guests that I've always wanted to have, so we're thrilled. I have an icebreaker question. We know about your mother's work and, of course, about the work you're doing at the EKR Foundation, but just to get to know you a little bit, you were also your mother's caregiver for the last 9 years of her life. So I want to ask you, what are 3 of your caregiver superpowers?
That's a good question. So my mom was like, the rebel of, the last century. I mean, everything she did in her work and personal life was rebellious. She rebelled against her family. She rebelled against society, not taking care of dying patients. So anyway, you can imagine she did not like being handled. So my God, I had to be so diplomatic that she actually told me that I was too Swiss. And coming from the Swiss hillbilly, that's like, quite a statement. So being diplomatic and being patient with my mother, she would have me come over and, Kenneth, I just need one little thing done. And then it was a second and a third. And it would get to be like 17 things. I'd write it out. I'd come back 4 days later, and she was very psychic. And she would just ask me about the one thing out of 17 I didn't do. All the time she knew. And Kenneth, I just asked you to do one thing. I'm like, Mom, it was 17 things. No, that's bullshit. I only asked you to get me some tea. So patience and diplomacy. And then the third thing would be, having a sense of humor because, we like to think the end is all smooth and happy and beautiful, and it doesn't work that way. It could be tough for, even for a person like my mom who had, countless thousands of followers and people wanted to help her. She still had a tough time. Even she was in hospice, she had a tough time. And so, you just had to understand that life and dying are not a perfect convention. We try to do the best we can. And we screw up sometimes. We just have to accept that. And, as long as we're doing things with a good heart and good intentions, we just got to accept our failures to some degree.
Of course. And I think every caregiver goes through some of that, especially if it's a mom and a mom like your mom. I'm thinking that as a nurse, I would have thought she was a difficult patient because it doesn't sound like she wanted to do anything but the way she wanted to do it. She knew her own mind.
Yeah, she was very naughty. That's what that was like her whole basis of work was being naughty and breaking the rules and doing, what was against convention. And so she specialized in that and in her personal life and in work.
Yeah, one of 3 triplets.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And from the get-go, she knew that she did not want to fill any traditional female role, did she?
Right. Yeah, being a triplet taught her a lot because she was not only a triplet, but she was a twin, and her parents couldn't tell her apart. So often she would get 2 baths, her sister wouldn't get any. All the teachers gave them the same grade because I couldn't remember which was which. And so my mother just really, really fought to have her own identity. Yeah. And so when she was working with dying patients, she said, these dying patients are like me as a triplet. They don't have their own identity. They're just a number in a bed. They're just a disease. Nobody calls them by their name. No one listens to what their individual needs are, just like no one listened to me when I was a triplet. Like my sisters both had a knee of my father, and I didn't have a knee because there wasn't a third knee. So my mom really fought, to have her own individuality, to be heard, to be seen, to have a name, but, there was no third knee. And my mother was always fighting, even her adult life, to have that third knee, right? To have that love, to have something she could never have.
It's interesting that she used that perspective in the care of her patients. That sense of needing identity for yourself and claiming it and respecting it and valuing it in other people. how she was able to translate that into the care that she provided for patients. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, everything in her life was a lesson. I mean, everything, like, growing up, so many things happened in her childhood. She had experiences with near death. She almost died. All those gave her lessons, which you can clearly see in her adult life working with patients.
Yeah. And she was a lifelong learner and boundary breaker and a person who thought out of the box.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. She's like, Kenneth, let's go break some rules. Let's go cause some mischief. Let's go do something naughty. Like even in her wheelchair, Kenneth, let's go, do something bad. So, like even her last 2 years, like she was naughty till the end.
Was your mom fun? Did you have fun with your mom?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. She was great. Both my parents had great sense of humor. They both talked about death and dying at the dinner table, like just endlessly growing up. But, they were also super fun.
Interesting.
So it was amazing to see my mother bring in humor with death and dying.
Were you ever shocked by that? Did it surprise you, or did it just seem like normal conversation for you?
Kind of the conversation was fine, but her breaking the rules was kind of shocking too, because I was always trying to get her to not exactly follow the rules, but like be careful in her public persona, things she said in the press, and she would purposely say naughty things in the press just to like get a rise out of people. And she never really cared about her PR, and I did, and her husband did, and we were constantly shocked by that. So.
Oh, she sounds like good people. Your mom her work is so widely recognized by those of us who work in end-of-life care. It was groundbreaking, and she worked with some groups that nobody wanted to work with.
Oh, yeah.
Pediatric AIDS patients, AIDS adults. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you can imagine, as a teenager in Switzerland, very conservative, she worked with prostitutes. Nobody wanted to work with prostitutes. Nobody in the hospital. And she said, like, hell yeah, like, they're individuals. They deserve love. Everyone deserves love. And so they would put her in the basement so no one would see her. And she would do like syphilis samples, work with prostitutes. And then when she got a following, they would allow her to work with families who had escaped over the Rhine River into Switzerland during World War II. So she would start working with bombing victims and families who had lost children. And, she would just work throughout the night as a teenager in the hospital, even without medical training. She knew she could contribute to the war and to people who were suffering. So she was working with all the marginalized people, as a teenager. After the war ended, she ended up working in Poland. She ended up living with the gypsies behind the Russian lines. She loved marginalized people. That was her thing. She wanted to go to Africa and work with Schweitzer. She was a rebel.
Yeah. She seemed to seek out those groups. And back then, I think we wouldn't have even called them marginalized. They probably didn't have that term for those people.
Right.
But they were sort of the outcasts. Yeah, the outcasts of society. Very interesting. Your mom had a farm where she cared for pediatric AIDS patients.
Right. She had a ranch in California and worked there for about 10 years. And then she moved to Virginia because she wanted to settle down a little bit. And Virginia reminded her of Switzerland with the rolling hills.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the work that she did there, about the place in Virginia.
Well, she actually ended up buying the ranch from Raymond Moody, who did that book, Life After Life. And Raymond also was wanting to settle down. And so she decided she would split the farm with Raymond, and she would do her workshops there. She had these workshops called the Life, Death, and Transition workshops. She thought that people were afraid to die because they're really afraid to live, and because they hadn't faced their unfinished business, which is what she called grief. So she wanted to teach people to deal with their unfinished business, and then they would never again be afraid to die. And so she would have these workshops with 100 people. And because my mom was a workaholic, she not only did the workshops, but she would actually cook the food on the farm for the people. So she's writing letters, to thousands of people. She's writing books. She's seeing patients. She has a running farm. She's doing workshops. I mean, the woman was unstoppable. Like, you cannot imagine how this woman just kept going and going and going like the Energizer Bunny.
Amazing. Amazing. So she was writing and publishing and doing all of this and cooking for what, 100 people?
100 people a week. She'd also participate in the cooking of the food on the weekends between the workshops.
Good heavens. She was a powerhouse.
Yeah, she was.
Powerhouse.
And she had, boxes and boxes of mail, and it was people would show up from around the world without any introduction, without any letter. They'd just show up and want to work with her. And so my mother had this very funny thing that she did. Like you were talking about my mom's sense of humor. So we'd be on the farm and say this very fancy doctor would show up from Europe, all dressed up in a suit and tie. And, he had all his letters after his name on his card. And my mother would say, yeah, okay, you want to work with me? Yeah, okay. Go feed the chickens. Go say hello to the cow. Get me a piglet, and then we'll talk. And they'd be like, excuse me, Dr. Ross, did I mention I was a famous doctor from France? And she'd say, yeah, go get me some eggs from the chickens and get me a little pig, and yeah, we'll talk. And so this was a test from my mother. She would say, like, if these people can get down on their hands and knees and get dirty and get in the muck and not be full of their ego and their pretensions and their letters after their name, these are the people I want to work with. But if they're too high and mighty, they will never see themselves as one-on-one with a dying patient, and they'll never treat them with respect. And this is how I test them. And that was just my mother's sense of humor, but it did work. I mean, it totally, you could see these people would never be a great, palliative doctor because they'd be too much of a snob, or they'd be a great doctor because they came back with their hands dirty. And It was a beautiful test. Beautiful, very simple, like a Swiss hillbilly way of testing these people. And that was my mother's sense of humor, but it was also serious too.
She was a little naughty. I like that about her.
Yeah. Totally.
But what she really was trying to see was if people were willing to get down into these populations and the care of these people that nobody else wanted to care for. Nobody wants to get the chicken and fetch the pig and do all the dirty work.
Right. It's not all glamorous.
Yeah.
Right.
She wanted to see if they would do the dirty work of medicine.
Exactly.
I love it. She's an amazing lady. So her work with AIDS patients was really on the cutting edge because she worked with them at a time when the AIDS epidemic was going on and nobody wanted to work with these patients. It was considered a death sentence. The cocktails and the meds weren't available back then.
Exactly.
Tell me about that work and the effects that it caused, because it was fairly controversial and it didn't make your mother very popular in a lot of places.
Yeah, nothing she did made her popular until years later because she was always ahead of her time. So what happened was, she had her ranch in San Diego, in Escondido. And so she's doing a lot of work in California, especially up north because, the AIDS epidemic kind of centered around San Francisco. She had a lot of people on her team working in San Francisco, and they were always talking about this new disease. And so my mom was up there. She's like, yeah, well, let's make room specifically for the AIDS patients. And everyone's like, oh, well, you can't bring AIDS patients into, your workshops. It'll be a liability. It'll be this, it'll be that, And she said, bullshit, they're dying. They need help more than anybody. I mean, they don't have time. I mean, we need to address this. And my mother never said no to anyone. So she brought them in, and then she began doing workshops specifically for the AIDS patients. And then what happened then was then she was seeing a lot of AIDS patients in hospitals. And the hospitals, would also be throwing them out, and there was no place for them to go. So she was developing respite centers for AIDS patients. And then she was hearing that a lot of people in jail, in prison, had AIDS, and no one was addressing this. So she began doing programming saying, hey, could we do workshops in prisons? And this was radical stuff in the 70s and 80s. No one was doing workshops in prisons for prisoners. And she did it not only in the United States, but in Ireland and Scotland. And she actually got the prison guards to spend a week in the prison with the prisoners in Ireland. Completely radical stuff. I mean, this is at the time of, Irish terrorism and a lot of hatred between, the British and the Irish and the prisoners and the guards, and she got them to spend a week together. I mean, how she did that is incredible. So then she began looking into, well, let's start hospices in prison. Again, a radical idea. In the early 1980s, I think 1984, she began sending her staff into prisons. The first one was Vacaville in California, but she did it in other prisons. And so this led to, just kept leading to new and new different ideas. But AIDS was a big thing for my mother. And, she did a lot of things with AIDS patients that they thought she was crazy. She thought she would die. She tried to start this AIDS hospice for children who had been abandoned, who had AIDS. It really triggered, again, something that she'd experienced as a child. She had pneumonia, and she felt she'd been abandoned in a hospital for a month. And so when she heard that these babies had been abandoned who had AIDS, it really triggered something that she had experienced. And so again, her youth completely formed her ideas of starting this AIDS hospice for babies who had been abandoned. And she tried to do it on a farm, and she got death threats. The police had to escort her to and from the farm, and she had bullet holes through her windows, and people with shotguns hung out in front of her farm. And my mother would just never take no for an answer. And so she kept pushing it, and finally they burnt down her farm. If you can imagine, this was the second time her home had been burnt.
The second time.
It had also been burnt down in Escondido. That time they were able to save most of the house, but in Virginia, she lost the whole house because she was out of town.
Wow.
So yeah, her work was controversial, from day one till the very end. And people still love to give her grief about the stages. They don't understand them. They don't understand her intent. But, it's a format that they kind of base, their platform on. So it's kind of hard to have a discussion with them.
So let's get to that. It was inevitable that we were going to talk about the 5 stages, right? Okay. So anybody that's listening, if you work in end-of-life care, it was never meant to be linear.
Right.
She never meant it that way. We are not supposed to be using, yes.
And if you look in the book, page 252, there's a graph, and there's clearly not 5 stages. There's 10 stages in that particular chart, but then if you dig deep and do some investigative research, you'll see my mother made charts that the so-called stages, emotions, are circles, or there's 3 at once, there's 2 at once, there's all sorts of variations, because what my mother was really saying was that grief is made up of a number of emotions. And back in the 1960s, 70s, grief was just one monolithic idea. Grief was grief. Right. All my mother was trying to do is saying, hey, grief is not one thing. Grief is made up of many things. And in the book, it clearly shows that grief is also made up of partial denial, anticipatory grief, anticipatory bargaining, I think. She talked about shock. She talked about hope. She talked about anxiety 14 times. So the chart with the so-called 5 stages was meant to be just a simple diagram of how one may go through, a process of grief, but it's not meant to be a single monolithic grief either. It's just meant to show you that grief is made up of many parts.
Yeah, that was just one piece.
Yeah, people don't listen, so they just want to.
That was sort of the foundation piece for your mom's work. And I think, unfortunately, people that don't know her work very well think that was the end-all, be-all, and that was all there was. And, of course, it's way more than that.
Right. If you study her work, you'll see my mother did not talk about the so-called stages between 1975 and 2000. She never mentioned it.
Really?
She never talked about it on TV. She never talked about it in lectures, but people think she was so obsessed with these stages. She didn't talk about it for a quarter of a century. So it's so obtuse when people say she's all about the stages. That's all she ever contributed.
Seems like her work is much broader than that.
Yeah. Her her work changed the hospice movement. It changed grief counseling, bereavement research, ethics in medicine, bioethics, public awareness. It changed, counseling, patient advocacy.
Yes.
The whole palliative care movement was based on her work.
This conversation is so good, but we're going to take a quick break. Hang on for more great content.
When someone you care about is nearing the end of life, it can be hard to know what to expect. BK Books is here to help families, caregivers, and professionals find comfort through understanding. Created by hospice nurse and end-of-life educator Barbara Carnes, these simple, trusted booklets and videos explain what happens when a person is dying, the changes that occur, the signs you can expect, and ways to bring comfort and provide care. With clear, compassionate information, BK Books helps you face one of life's hardest moments with confidence instead of fear. Whether you're supporting a loved one or guiding a family, these resources make a real difference. Resources from BK Books have helped hundreds of thousands of families and healthcare professionals navigate dying with confidence and compassion. People don't die like they do in the movies. Understanding what's happening can bring calm when everything feels uncertain. Explore the trusted guides and learning tools from hospice pioneer Barbara Carnes at bkbooks.com.
So tell me about the EKR Foundation, what its mission is, and what you guys are doing around the world.
Well, I was lucky enough to travel to 19 countries with my mother growing up. And so I saw, her work, her lectures, her workshops, her counseling with Eskimo tribes and Indian peoples and people in Africa and all over the world. So it was amazing to see how multicultural her work was, and it completely defied religion, socioeconomic boundaries, you name it. And so, but what I did see is my mother, despite traveling intensely in 5 cities a week, different countries every week, she just couldn't do it all. And I know she had a lot of dreams that didn't come to fruition. And I know she just wanted to keep on going. So when she died, I realized that she still had a very powerful legacy, and there was still a lot to be done in her name. And I just saw how many people were inspired by her philosophies around the world. And so I decided to start this foundation, and I had no idea what I was doing. Some days I still think I have no idea. But I think I've got the hang of it as much as I'm going to at this point after 20 years. But we just continue where she left off. So, my mother never did a lot of work in Latin America, for example. So we started groups in Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Peru, Guatemala, Mexico. We have started the first pediatric children's hospice. We initiated that down in Santiago. We are working on the first hospice in East Timor. We're working on one of the world's first indigenous hospices in eastern Guatemala. We're starting a compassionate community group in Singapore, working with St. Luke's Hospital and the government this coming January. We donated Mom's work to Stanford, and they're building a digital library so people around the world can study her work. We're going to be working next year with the Swiss Embassy, the University of Chicago. We just connected to the city of Paris. We're going to be doing a project with the catacombs next year to do some educational projects with my mom's work and making the catacombs more than just a tourist experience, but an educational experience. So we're very excited about that.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah, we're working with Anelda, the end-of-life death doula group here in New Jersey, to do a grief project. We're re-releasing a number of her books as ebooks, which have never been available as ebooks, including the Dougie letter, which is a letter she wrote to a dying child. I think it's been released in about 14, 15 languages, but it's never been an ebook before in English, and so it'll make it a lot more available around the world. We're also working on a movie on my mom's life. We're working with a number of cemeteries to do grief training. We've started that already in Central America. And we're also working to make my mom's books available in more languages. So since she has died, I've been able to make her book available in 17 languages that were not available during her lifetime. So we're up to 44 languages. And my dream is to have them up to 50 languages. So we're going to be translating her work into Ukrainian, Nepalese, and Hindi next. And then I'm looking for 3 more languages. So we got a lot going on.
I think you inherited your mother's work ethic, Ken.
Oh, yes. It's just
Absolutely.
never enough because, she taught me that no matter how long life is, it's too short. And so I just want to go out there and, do as much as I can, model my life after my mother's. I've been to 112 countries, and I'm hoping to go to like another 30, 40 countries before I check out of here and just see it all and do it all. And when I go on a vacation trip, I try to do some work. Like 3 years ago during COVID, I went to Iraq for a vacation, and I ended up going to the biggest cancer hospital in Iraq. And I had a tour. I spent a couple hours with the doctors, and I asked them, what can I do to help you? And they said, well, we really need to be more connected to the outside world. We need some training. And so I connected them to a number of palliative care groups around the world. And I promised them that I would make sure that they received some free training, which I did. And then when I'm on a work trip, I make sure I have some time for me. So I go on a vacation. I go on vacation, I do some work, and I'm doing work, and I take a few days off to do my photography, which I love. So I try to take care of the caregiver, which was a big lesson my mom gave, which was, caring for the caregiver. So I try to find some balance even when I'm out there doing crazy trips.
Your mother was a pretty unique individual when it comes to how she understood patients and what they went through, their perspective and their version of things. I don't know. I just find her fascinating, probably because she was a little bit naughty, right?
Right, exactly.
I think that was just her personality. But what was it like for her in Switzerland? That was where she was born and raised. What was it like when she went back to work in Switzerland?
It was hard. I think she got her degree in 1957. And, in 1957, there was not a lot of female doctors.
Right.
And really hadn't even studied for the courses that prepare you to go into medical school. But because she had volunteered as a teenager at the hospital, because she had spent 2 years going around Europe, risking her life in many, many countries doing relief work, she had a reputation. And so therefore they let her into medical school based purely on that.
Interesting.
Like the work, not the training, but she had actually delivered the work and risked her life so many times, in her 20s and as a teenager, going to these towns that had lawlessness, that had tuberculosis, that had, disease, and it was crazy what she did. So she was known as being a little bit crazy, but also very brave and, just doing anything to save people, just making a difference with each individual.
Yeah.
And even though Switzerland was very conservative at the time, they let her into the hospital, which they hadn't thought they would do. Her family let her back in, which they didn't think they were going to do. They kicked her out twice. So
I was going to ask, what did her parents think of this career path?
they said, if you do this, you'll never come back into the family. And she said,
Wow.
I don't care. I've got to do the right thing. Like, I've heard so many horror stories. I've lived here 30 miles from the German border during the war. I've seen horrific things. I've heard horrific things. Her family was the first family in her village to have a radio. So the whole village would come to her family to listen and catch up on the war every day. And it made a big difference. And she said, the day the war is over, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do something and I'm going to make a difference.
Wow.
And she did.
Was her father a doctor?
No, her father was a businessman, and her father was a very traditional, hardcore, my way or the highway kind of guy. And, that was kind of both terrible and great for my mother. It inspired her to be really tough, which she didn't see, but it also, gave her a longing to have this acceptance from her father, which kind of wasn't ever going to come. And so it really drove her to become the person she became. in a bad way too, not just in a good way. So,
Right. So what
so
about her siblings? They were two girls, two
right.
other girls in the set of triplets. Were either one of them, did they work in healthcare? Did they break out of the female role that was of the time?
Yes and no. Yes, and that her twin actually became the first female senator in Switzerland. So that was
Oh,
really a big deal because Switzerland's very conservative, and to become, the first Swiss congresswoman was a huge deal. She was also an author. She was also a journalist. So she was also a go-getter, but on a quieter kind of path.
right, right.
And then her other sister, she was a housewife, but she was very, very headstrong and very, very funny. And even in her 80s, her sister would feed homeless children in Nepal for 3 months. She went down to Zanzibar by herself. She went to Goa, India once a year for a month to hang on the beach by herself in her 80s. She was on the cross country ski team. She played organ at the church. So she was not, busting any new, uh, places that hadn't been explored like my mother. But on the other hand, she was not like, a little diminutive housewife. So,
Right. Your poor grandparents. Oh my goodness.
yeah, so they were headstrong in their own way.
Yeah.
And they were beautiful people. They were both like my second mothers. They were
Amazing.
incredible individuals.
Amazing. So 2025 sees the 20th anniversary of the EKR Foundation, and 2026 is going to be, because we're recording this towards the end of 2025, the anniversary of what would have been her 100th birthday.
Right.
So you have plans for this, no doubt. How are you guys at EKR Foundation going to commemorate these things?
Well, of course, we're going to redo the website and make it more up to date, and we're also making it available in more languages. So we're putting in filters that can automatically figure out where you're coming from and just automatically show the website in that language, which we've been wanting to do for a number of years. We are contacting a number of groups like the American Writers Museum and the University of Chicago, seeing if we can do some commemorative things for Mom. I think ADEC has some plans. And as I mentioned, we're working on some books. And we've got some other plans, which I can't talk about yet. But I mentioned we're doing the movie on my mother. So currently we're working with Riley Keough, Elvis's granddaughter. So we're hoping that may come out next year. Someone's talked about renaming a street in Ireland where, she did her work with prisons. So we've already got 2 streets named after Mom. So we're looking for a third. We're looking for the University of Zurich also to do a project. So doing a lot of scholarly things. We're going to work on that website that Stanford University has, see if we can broaden that, make it available in Spanish too, since she has such a following in Latin America. And we're going to be working on the Respite Center in Central America and starting a few new chapters of the foundation. We've had requests from Czechoslovakia, I believe, and Southeast Asia, and I think from India and a few other places. So we're just going to be broadening the foundation's reach.
Amazing. Amazing. How can listeners find the EKR Foundation? You guys have a ton of offerings and connections all over the world. How can listeners connect?
Well, we have websites in 6 languages. We have Instagram in English, Spanish, Portuguese. I think that's it currently. And we're on LinkedIn, of course. We're on TikTok. We're on Pinterest. We're on just about everything except Snapchat. And we are trying, of course, to take care of our listeners from other countries. So we're trying to make this available on different languages. I think we have an Italian Facebook. We have a German Facebook. And generally, we're working through the foreign foundations. What I found is, there's only a certain amount of me. There's only a certain amount of people in the foundation. And I found, just like my mother's work, she found she could only do so much in her lifetime. And so we're trying to focus on projects that are going to change cultures generationally. Like by starting a pediatric hospice in Chile, that's a generational change in
Yes.
the society of Chile. We're now starting the first adult hospice in Chile. Again, generational change. Like I could go and do classes in all these countries and give workshops. That's great, but there's other people doing it. But there's things I can do on behalf of my mother that will make a generational change, like starting this indigenous hospice in Guatemala. That's generational.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for the big generational, big things that will change things beyond my lifetime, not just giving some classes here and a workshop there, but the big ticket things, like my mother did that changed societies. She started the first hospice in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Italy. So I'm looking for those big ticket items that will go beyond my lifetime.
Yeah. Lasting legacy.
Yeah.
Amazing. Amazing.
So,
I will have links to everything because you've given me all your socials and your website and everything. I'll have links in the show notes. Ken, if you were sitting with your mother today, what would she tell you to do? What would be on her list?
she'd say, Kenneth, let's go shopping. Get me some chocolate. Let's have some tea and some cigarettes.
Cigarettes? What?
Oh, yeah. She smoked to the very end. I mean, she had an oxygen bottle by her bed. She was like, Kenneth, I want to smoke. Yeah, because I was naughty. So,
I love it. I love it.
So, and I was taking her to Switzerland up till almost the very end. Like we went to her sister's funeral when she was 75 and she died at 78. So I was pushing her in a wheelchair, but we got her back to Switzerland twice.
Your mom was an amazing lady. It's wonderful to hear the legacy that you're carrying forward. Her work is foundational to all of us who work in end-of-life care, and we're grateful for what you're doing to carry it forward. And thank you so much for being on the show, Ken. It's been an honor to have you.
Oh, thank you. I'm honored. I appreciate your interest and appreciate conversation and what you do in your own right. So all important that we all do our bit.
Thanks for listening to the Heart of Hospice podcast. Check out our sponsor in the show notes and please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We would appreciate it if you would share this episode with your friends and family and anyone who needs to know more about hospice. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, no matter who you are or where you are in your hospice journey, you are the heart of hospice.
This is the Whole Care Network. Helping you tell your story one podcast at a time.